Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum and welcome to yet another episode of The Big Issue. Viewers, as you know, A Big Issue is a weekly program. I'm your host, Ali Mohsin Hashmi, and I welcome every single one of you who's actually watching and tuning in today. Weekly show Big Issue has been focusing for the last few weeks over the activity over General Election 2015, as it is widely said that General Election 2015 holds a very important significance to a wider society and in particular ethnic minorities settled here in the UK for many reasons, one of which is immigration, education, health, and various other public services which are currently under scrutiny with the current government, and also it is on top of the list for many political parties. Over the last few weeks, as you know, we've been talking about various political parties. We started off with Conservatives. We also talked about SNP. Last week we talked about Labour Party. We talked about how Yvette Cooper defended the manifesto and various other provisions within the public spending and how the balancing of the book was going to be discussed. We also talked about how policing and infrastructure within the policing will be affected by discussing the wider policies, by discussing with Shadow Minister of State Policing Jack Dromey, and all of this was discussed with a very respected Dr. Ijaz Hussain, our panelist and also our senior analyst who actually blesses us with his presence. Today, General Election 2015, we have the pleasure of Liberal Democrats senior representatives here in the studios with me. I have here with me on the left, very own, without any introduction, doesn't require any introduction, a very prominent Liberal Democrat figure, Phil Bennion. Welcome very much, Phil. I also have Barrister Ayub Khan, a well-known figure from Birmingham political and various organisations, and I also have with me Shahzad. Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the show for everyone. Dr. Saab, once again, it's a pleasure having you in the studio this time around with the political party themselves as last few weeks. Kicking off General Election 2015, Phil, straight over to you. Liberal Democrats back in 2010 and 2015. How do you see the political campaign for general election? How do you compare the two campaigns?
Well, they're very different because we've had 5 years in government, and in 2010, of course, we hadn't been in government for 70 odd years, and so it is a very, very different situation. Of course, being in government has brought with it political difficulties. When we took over in 2010, we were facing a very, very critical situation with the current government at the time was only raising £3 in taxes for every £4 that it was spending, and of course that's an unsustainable situation. Yeah. So we had to take some difficult decisions. It was actually very difficult to think that we should be in coalition with the Conservative Party because for most of us they're the traditional enemy, but we had to form a government in the national interest, and our role in that government was very much to ensure that the Conservatives didn't follow their worst instincts and to make it a fair government and in the interests of all the people. And one of the things we did was my own policy of raising the tax threshold, which has given all working families £800 extra over this Parliament by taking the threshold up to £10,000. Now, this is, I think, our key achievement in government. We know that campaigning now after 5 years in government and trying to defend our record is very, very different from the luxury of an infinite time in opposition and being able to say pretty well anything. But I feel that we are turning the corner on this, and people are starting to recognise that we have actually done a good job in government, and that the alternative of an unadulterated Conservative government, I think we've produced something that is very, very much more preferable, and that goes for both ends of the spectrum. For the people at the bottom of the pile, we've given, we've provided double the number of apprenticeships, very much a Liberal Democrat policy. We've raised the tax threshold, so we've helped those who are worst off. We've helped produce more opportunities for young people, but at the same time, we've delivered economic responsibility. And if you actually look at what the newspapers are saying, the really influential newspapers are saying, the Financial Times yesterday said, if you are in a seat where the Liberal Democrats are the incumbents or they are the main challengers, you should vote Liberal Democrat.
Okay, well, I'm aware that you're also, member of the cabinet in terms of policy making for Liberal Democrats. So we will be talking about some of the policies which actually do directly and indirectly affect, in particular, ethnic minority, considering the audience that we are actually targeting this particular program to. I would actually ask Shahzad, first of all, good luck for the election campaign. I know this is going to be the first ever parliamentary election that you're going to be going through. Quick question: why Liberal Democrats?
Well, first of all, let me thank Hidayat TV for giving myself and my party the opportunity and the platform. Myself, Shahzad Iqbal, parliamentary candidate for the Liberal Democrats here in Birmingham, the Ladywood constituency, and also the president of the British Kashmir Foundation UK. Coming to your point, sir, is why the Liberal Democrats? Since I've become involved in politics, this is the first party that I've joined. At that time, I had the opportunity to look around all the parties and their policies. And when I joined the Labour Party approximately the Liberal Democrats Party 9-10 years ago, one of the main reasons at that time was the Iraq War, which I'm sure we all remember. The Labour Party took us into this war alongside with the Americans, and at that time I decided, and obviously I had the support of my senior colleagues within the Liberal Democrats, and of course my main point of contact at that time and my support was Barrister Ayub Khan, who actually brought me into the party. And obviously I've never looked back, and to be honest with you, it's a party which I believe is a very fair party. It's a party that's given chances to many people out there, especially from the BME community, to stand up as their local candidates for the local elections, and of course for parliamentary candidates. And not forgetting, I have also been on the executive committee, which I'm in charge of the diversity group. We have many colleagues from different communities, which I represent on the regional executive committee as well. So I think these are some of the issues. I mean, I know you want to talk about policies later on, but I mean the policies obviously at that time very fair, very equal for all of us, and that's what I believed at that time, and which I still believe in now, that the Liberal Democrats is the party for us. And that's the reasons.
Well, thank you very much. We will be talking to you about various aspects of the policy, in particular Kashmir, because I know that as a human rights activist, prior to becoming the candidate, I know your background is quite human rights activism, and you have actually served the community for a number of years. How Liberal Democrat equate to that particular equation, we'll talk about that. But welcome to the show, Barrister Ayub Khan. By profession, I know you're a barrister, but in terms of political activism, you have been a political activist for a number of years. We've seen you in the cabinet, we've seen you as a councillor, and we've seen you on various public platforms.
Yes.
You have been a devout Liberal Democrat supporter.
I have.
And probably when we wouldn't see many ethnic faces within this party.
Absolutely. I mean, I just want to pick up on what Shahzad said. My prime reason for getting involved in politics, because back in 2003, where most, young, educated young men and women which are in their professions seldom want to come out and engage in politics for one reason or another. Commitments, professional commitments. And I represented an inner city area of Aston for approximately 10 years, and it's real hard work because obviously the needs are different. And my prime reason was the Iraq War, because as an individual which felt politics never really would affect me, this is the sort of outlook many young people have. It rapidly became reality when you think, well, actually, everything that you do has an implication from politicians. So I scoped the various political parties, but clearly the main policy of the Liberal Democrats not to invade a nation which, on the face of it, did not have weapons of mass destruction, where we were being misled That was a driving force for my political involvement. That was my embryonic involvement.
On the
And
same note, Liberal Democrat
Yeah.
doesn't seem to have the same view about Iran.
Well, can I say that there's a number of issues which you have a very sensitive area, a very important area. I think you have to look at the initial stage when the Iraq situation had broken up. That was weapons of mass destruction. Iran is a very different story because yes, there is work being done in terms of capabilities and what is the nuclear arsenal or whatever they are, I suppose, building in Iran. There's a question mark, and I think if it is, personally, not the party, but I believe that if nations out there are looking to defend themselves, they ought to be given that. But I think, as a Liberal Democrat, we are all trying to drive down that nuclear threat. And ultimately, Nick Clegg said the other day that, yes, we want to keep the trident, but in the same light, we want to be able to reduce the amount of funding that we spend in military, because really, is the world going to be any more safer? And I think that's the sort of thing, as politicians, we should be promoting, that we need to make the world safe. And if there are nations out there which have used nuclear capable artillery and they are in control, then why not other countries?
Fair
That's
enough.
a personal point.
We'll talk about that a bit in more detail. Doctor, first of all, welcome to the show once again. Generally, I have the pleasure of hearing a lot from you, but today I think you are one of the listeners, just like me, here on the show as well. Going back to my first question, which opened the debate today, how is Liberal Democrats' campaign different from 2010 and 2015? Because back in 2010, we actually, see, people and Liberal Democrats, devotes who actually wanted to support the party for various reasons, in particular Iraq. We don't have Iraq anymore, and we don't have defense issues as prevailing as Iraq at the time. And Liberal Democrats' stance back then and today on international policy, in particular defense. How do you see the campaigns going to be affected back in 2010 and now 2015 overall, just as a layman's term?
Thank you, Ali. Before I answer to your question, which is a very intriguing one, I would like to wish them all very well, because they could be the balancing factor as they were in 2010. But the thing is, I would like to make a correction also. The learned barrister said that Iran's nuclear arsenal is not the term which is being used there, because Iran has not reached that stage, that level where arsenal word can enter into nuclear lexicon in nuclear diplomacy. So after that, coming to your question, in 2010, there was only one wedge which was balancing the Labour and the Conservative.
Yeah.
And wherever that wedge was giving edge, so that became the government later on, the Lib Dem and the Tory government. But this time they have more challenges. There are attendant fears that they might be reduced from 57, 58 down to 40, 42, 43.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing is, now there could be two wedges. One themselves, and the second is the emerging party from the Highlands.
Right.
So if SNP are, in my calculus, if they're able to make something like 44 or 45, they make like 40 to 43. So the conflation of these two wedges, that will create a very big triangle for both the parties. So let's see what happens. So the thing is that as a voter, what I see from them is that the things that affect me, and I'm being from the Pakistani background, British citizen, but with Pakistani background, the things that affect me, EU does not affect me that much, foreign policy does not affect me that much, only different element within that, the funding of that,
The Department of International
money going
Development,
towards Pakistan, £500 million per year as it is. That affects me and Malcolm Bruce. I keep talking to Malcolm Bruce in Aberdeen, and we keep meeting at the House of Commons when I go and join in some of the seminars. The things that affect me being a person from Pakistani background as a voter is the housing, the welfare, employment, higher education, school education, and the discrimination with which the previous government has led the immigration policy. I still remember a couple of years ago, Honorable the Prime Minister of this country, my Prime Minister as well, He went to India a couple of years ago, and he took all the laurels which he had in the Kew Gardens there and said, all right, you do your masters, we'll give you a job. Your fee would be reduced. The terms and condition of your student immigration would be, again, lenient. But there is nothing of that sort which is being offered to the Pakistani people coming for higher education. That was a very big thorn, really, that affected me as a voter here. This is a discrimination.
Right.
And that has to be settled. As I'm saying, being a well-wisher of all these three friends of ours today, that if they win and they make, again, as a kingmaker, they emerge with SNP, I would definitely see how they play on that sticky wicket, that when they have to deal with India and Pakistan. I'm not discussing Kashmir because Shahzad is much more articulate in talking about Kashmir. He's an office bearer also at the highest level in Kashmir welfare. The thing is that how they dissipate any concerns which really they are formulated because of a discrimination in immigration policy towards India and Pakistan. That
So
has
what
to
you're
be
saying
addressed.
is, when it comes to non-EU immigration policy making, and in particular South Asian region, which has the majority of three major nations, Pakistan, India and Bangladesh, there are two different set of rules being followed. Is that what you suggested?
Yeah.
Okay. You obviously in the policy making cabinet as well.
Yes.
Of Lib Dem. How do you defend your policy in the last 5 years for the
Well,
immigration?
it wasn't our policy on immigration over the last 5 years. We had a
But tighter border was
yes,
Craig's message.
No, we had yes, tighter borders. But if you look at what we were suggesting for tighter borders, it was actually our main plank was reintroducing exit checks. The reason to reintroduce exit checks was the question kept coming up: how many illegal immigrants are there in the UK? And the answer was always nobody has any idea, because people were arriving here on tourist visas, and we had absolutely no way of knowing whether they'd gone home or not. So what we were saying is let's bring in exit checks, and it's taken 5 years, but they're on the way in just now. They were abolished in 1999 as an economy measure, and but nobody really thought then was, well, how are we going to know who's actually in the country if we don't actually count people out? Now, if you actually look at our actual policy on migration, we want to drop the limit, the threshold of 18,500 or 400.
400.
Yeah, down to about 13,500. Now, for bringing in spouses.
Yeah.
Now, that's policy. Personally, myself, and I'm on record as saying this, I believe anybody should be able to marry anybody in the world that they please, and we should respect those marriages and decisions. And a married couple should be able to live, if they're of two different nationalities, in either of those two nations. So that is my personal view, and I strongly believe that as a matter of principle.
I've heard Nick Clegg say the same thing, and I
Yes.
think this appears to be a message overall the party. But one thing is saying that you can actually marry whosoever, but on
Yes.
the second page, what you actually do is you actually introduce stricter rules, i.e., a new English test, and also the Life in the UK test was also your creation.
No, the Life in the UK test was not something that I subscribe to. I've seen these have been in a long time, because I have lodgers from Eastern Europe.
Yeah.
I've got one actually, and they had to take the Life in the UK test several years ago. So I think they've been in longer than this government, and they're absurd. I've seen the questions. I've got a degree in history, a first-class honours degree in history from Birmingham University, and I couldn't answer half of these questions. So they're absurd. So I'm no supporter personally of this life in the
So
UK test.
does that sit with Theresa May then? Is that what
I
you're
think it
suggesting?
rather sits. Well, I think it actually predates this government. I'm not exactly certain when it did come in.
It actually came in immediately after the
Immediately, it
coalition.
must have been. Yeah, I would certainly blame Theresa May in that case, but certainly nothing that I support, and I've spoken against it.
Well, on your party's website, you actually taking credit for introducing the new test, which is integration with the British society in the form of an English test. So, is that
Well, no, I haven't put it there, but
well,
I
this
don't.
is this is
yes.
your party's taking credit for that.
Well, I will take that up with them because I think there's nothing. I think it's an absurd test. I'm not saying there shouldn't be any form of test, but if you're going to be a migrant as such, not a visitor, but I still hold what I've said on marriage. I think you should be able to marry anybody in the world and live in the nation state of either of the spouses. So I think that's absolutely a fundamental principle of human rights, in my view.
Fine. So in your view, I fully understand. I mean, as much as I would like to hear the individual personal views,
Yes.
I know at the moment the priority is for you to get yourself in the office or get yourself in the House of Commons. But I think right now what our viewers want to know is the policy
Yes.
of the
I think-
wider party.
Can I
Yeah,
just,
please,
Ali,
go
if I just talk about it, I mean, Labour and the Conservatives will have more stricter policies when it comes to immigration than the Liberal Democrats. I mean, Phil just outlined that one of the key policies that we would like to see implemented is the reduction of that threshold, which is affecting many thousands of families. 18,600 is the threshold. And clearly, if it was brought down to 13,000, then that would assist many families because, as you know, at the moment, people on benefits, for example, whether they receive housing benefit or council tax benefit and income support or job seekers allowance, their allowance as a couple amounts to about 10 to 12,000, and they can survive on that kind of income. So we've always said that this higher threshold is not something which is fair. But you've got to appreciate that we are a minority partner in the coalition. So what we can deliver, we do. We act as an anchor. We've done that for the last 4 or 5 years. We've acted as an anchor on the speedboat, which the Conservatives are riding. You know, so just in terms of that particular policy and the wider immigration implications, there is, and we must accept, in Britain today, a massive movement, the UKIP party, which are applying inherently, as you would expect, pressure on all the other main political parties. Immigration, in reality, has never been a big problem because we know, as my parents, when they came into this country, they've contributed enormously, and that's one of the reasons why the Liberal Democrats said that we should really be looking at illegal immigrants, giving them legal status in the UK. That way, the black market, which utilises them, would not be able to survive.
No, but Nick Clegg talks about reducing the net migration and tightening the borders.
But can I just finish my point? So when we talked about these various policies, we've got an absolute massive backlash. Talking about European influx, once again, the Liberal Democrats have been open, honest and transparent about saying we want people to be able to move freely. And we get hit back and we don't have as many representatives either in the House of Commons or even locally, because whilst the minority may like our policies, in reality, the wider communities simply feel that's a step too far. And so when you balance the factors which we are seeing prevailing in these current elections, immigration's become topic number one, not, when you look at certain areas, and when one really should be looking at actually the economy of this country, what is actually happening, what are the banking sector doing, how are we stabilizing that area, how are we trying to create further jobs, apprentices, and we've played a massive role in that. I think that is fundamental, but this debate has been skewed by the introduction of UKIP and giving the platform to people like that.
I think, we're talking about immigration. The reason why we're talking about immigration is because we actually, Phil mentioned that, one of the, as the cabinet member of policy making for Liberal Democrats, I think I couldn't find a better person to be talking to, about the policies. But when you talk about immigration for Asian community, Dr. Ijaz very rightly mentioned that there are actually two standards being formed. So what we as voters want to know is, how is it that you can actually help us balance?
Yes,
I think
we can
this
get rid of.
imbalance.
We can certainly get rid of this. Well, if we reduce this this amount of money down to 13,500, it's a positive step. Personally, I would just abolish the
Cap.
altogether.
Doctor, how do you feel about what's been said?
No, I was particularly concerned about the students coming.
Yes.
I mean, aspiring for higher education, coming to the UK universities from India and Pakistan. They are treated in two different ways. The Pakistani students, they are not considered that important. So immigration laws are stringent for them, and the selection procedures are difficult for them to coming to these universities. Whereas for India, they're all floodgates are open, and David Cameron 2 years ago he went there. He said that, and that really pinches me as a voter. These three are the leaders. We have to follow them. They are our leaders in the House of Commons, and I wish them all well.
I wouldn't say that.
I'm the voter. I'm the voter.
No,
I'm
but
the
when
voter.
you represent us, that means you're leading us into
I mean, can I say that, we are cogs in this machinery. We don't dispute that. But can we say that, I take what you're saying in terms of disparity between India and Pakistan. Of course, the Kashmir issue, for example, is a prime important piece of movement that we have in Birmingham, where human rights violations are occurring almost on a daily basis, and yet, we see very little said in terms of human rights abuses. And David Cameron was there, didn't address it at all, which is quite shocking. But the reality is that we, as this little coalition partner, try to do as much as we can. We are a party of equal opportunity, equal rights, and we want to see that. But, the reality is very different on the ground. Phil Bennion, for example, was a European Member of Parliament. He fought ferociously around human rights abuses and violation. And unfortunately, he lost. And, that was in Birmingham.
I lost to UKIP.
West Midlands. And so our community really needs to engage in not only in the talk of politicians, but the actual physical policies, which
I would
really
absolutely
happen.
second that. I'm a witness myself that Phil has done extensive amount of work for human rights violation that's been happening in Kashmir and over the last 20, 30 years in particular. Shahzad, I've got a question for you, because obviously this would be your first election for a parliamentary seat, and having worked within minorities and ethnic groups, different ethnic groups for a number of years, how big of an issue do you think it is in terms of immigration, and how do you think Lib Dems actually address that issue when it is compared with the mainstream parties?
Well, I think Phil's highlighted that, and Ayub's also highlighted this your question. But again, as I sort of see these issues, I would completely I'm against it, and if it was personal opinion again, I would want it completely scrapped. I believe, like Phil said, that with the Liberal Democrats, anybody is allowed to make their choices, who they want to get married from, where and from where. Again, so myself, as I said, it's something which I totally disagree with. As for the party, we're trying to sort of make sure that we can bring this 18,600 from 18,600 down to 13,000, 13,500. That's something which we are trying to do as a party, and we will continue to make sure that we can fight our corner in the coming years, whether we're in government or not. We will still, as a party, continue working on these issues. So that's what I believe in a sort of a nutshell.
Great, thank you. Moving on from immigration.
Can I just answer about the students?
Mm-hmm.
Because when the Conservatives started talking about this net immigration cap, I'm on record as saying that they were completely nuts or balmy because in terms of students, the students coming to our universities is worth £6 billion a year.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a major industry in effect.
But
It's an invisible earning.
It's the disparity.
And no, the disparity. I mean, there's, as far as I know, there is nothing in law that's different about students coming in from different from India or Pakistan. So it must be simply maybe David Cameron has
Given a culture, I
has
think-
given a green light to it in India that has created more applicants. But I can't see why there should be any block on applicants from Pakistan
Fair enough.
coming to British universities. And I would encourage them to, because our universities are some of the best universities in the world, and we need the foreign students. We need more foreign students to come in and attend these universities to make sure that they stay ahead and stay competitive with the American universities.
Just to add on to that, Phil, I think, I mean, obviously this issue's been raised here, and it's one that we will look at and review the statistics to see if there is this disparity, what are the reasons,
Yes.
and then address it in that way.
Okay, so is that the first time you've heard of this issue?
Absolutely, I can say that.
The disparity, yes.
Living in Birmingham, this is the first time it's been raised that there is
Well, I
disparity.
think
between-
I can assure you that Dr. Ijaz, thanks to you for bringing
Yes,
this to
thank you, yes.
No doubt
the
about that.
policymakers' attention. And going back to the education subject, I know Nick Clegg time and again has mentioned that he believes in education, promoting the education on grassroots level.
Yeah.
And we've actually witnessed him, delivering a lot of speeches. And at the same time, he talks about I remember back in 2010, prior to the election, on national TV, during one of the debates, he actually talked about pledging to students, for which he actually had to apologise recently.
Yeah.
Whose doing was that he had to apologise in the end?
Well,
Phil, to you.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Nick decided to apologise. I do agree that with some of the critics that our MPs could have fought harder for free student tuition. I don't think they would have won that argument, but I think they might have limited the fee increases. To my mind, it's not productive either for the students themselves or the economy generally for students to be saddled with that much debt when they leave university. So I was one of the advocates of free tuition, but I was also an advocate.
But where were you going to find the money to fund that?
I was also an advocate of a graduate tax. I would be quite happy to pay an extra penny or 2 pence in the pound on my income as a graduate, because I think that's
Because you received free education?
I did receive free education,
So
yes.
it's-
Except that I did in my day. I didn't get a maintenance allowance, so I still ended up with some debt. But I had my tuition fees paid, so I received tuition fees, free tuition. So I would be quite happy to pay an extra penny or 2 pence in the pound, just simply as a tax code change. Now that after this election, I think we've learnt from the mistake that we made, that we had a policy going into that election that the Labour Party was opposed to and the Conservative Party were opposed to. So when we ended up having to negotiate coalition agreements, it was quite clear that either from the Labour Party's angle or the Conservative Party's angle, free tuition was off the agenda. What we should have dug in for, I think, was a cap of £6,000 at the time. I think we should have dug in for that. But remember, the Conservatives wanted no cap whatsoever.
Well, according to
So-
Liam Byrne,
Yes.
now obviously being the shadow education secretary, Labour Party's position right now is that they actually want to cap the tuition fees up to £6,000.
At £6,000.
Is that?
yes.
Are you suggesting that this is something that? Because obviously this is what.
No, I still think £6,000 would leave students with a massive amount of debt. I think we have to find a different way.
Okay.
I think this these high levels of fee, for instance, when a student is no longer a student and they've graduated, they're either going to be looking for a job somewhere in the country. They need to be flexible. They're highly skilled. They need to go to where the job is. Yet they won't be able to get on the mortgage. It's going to be more difficult for them to get mortgages if they have £30,000 or £40,000 of debt sitting on their balance sheet. Also, what about the route that I took? After only 1 year's working, borrowed money to set up my own business. Would I be able to borrow £40,000 to set up a business now, if I already had £40,000 of debt sitting on my balance
But
sheet?
even if you had 40,000 in today's climate, I don't know how encouraging it is for new entrepreneurs to actually set up new businesses.
I think that usually in this sort of climate is exactly when new entrepreneurs do set up new businesses. It's tough going.
But in the measures of austerity?
You have to find that a lot of new businesses are set up during recessions or just after recessions. Simply
2 million jobs have been created.
Yes. And we've got more people working now.
Medium-sized companies.
Well, you almost sounded like someone from Tory, because they do say that 2 million jobs were created, but on the same token, you are not actually telling us that there are 0 hours contract included in those 2 million jobs that you've created.
What's the stats? Is it one in every? I think it's 1 in every 40 was a 0-hour contract or something.
Probably less than that.
But anyway, the point is that we're living in times of austerity. It's not the same. I had free education. But let's not forget Tony Blair, who was in government, a Labour government, who advocated 3 policies for the nation: education, education, and education.
Mm-hmm.
He, as the Prime Minister, and the Labour Party and Labour government introduced tuition costs. Not only did they introduce them, but they increased tuition fees. And we inherited a massive deficit. And this is obviously an issue in terms of what you pledge and what you deliver. Had we been in government as the Liberal Democrat Party, then we had plans. For example, cutting back on Trident, redirecting the funding for that into supporting students. We weren't in government. We were in a coalition. We had to strike deals. So getting, working families 10,500 tax-free, that was something that we had to essentially force the Conservatives. I know they're trying to take advantages over that particular policy, but it was the Liberal Democrat policy.
Remember that David Cameron in 2010 in the election campaign said that our policy of raising the tax threshold to £10,000 was impossible to deliver.
Yeah, and
he said that it was impossible to deliver.
And here it is now, taking advantage. But let's not forget Liam Byrne, because you've talked about Liam Byrne. He is the incumbent in Hodghill constituency against Phil Binion. And
yes, indeed.
He is.
Absolutely.
And what did he leave in the Treasury? A note saying that we've got nothing left in the coffers. I mean, talk about adding insult to injury. That is what Liam Byrne left. And so we did not have the luxury starting.
Are you saying that Nick Clegg in that instance overcommitted himself prior to not knowing?
No, because we had a costed, budgeted approach across the whole of the tax and spend agenda to deliver that free tuition. It just meant that other things would have gone short.
Trident, for example, would have gone short. Yeah. The Conservatives were not going to allow that.
Nick Clegg still doesn't want to
and our taxes would have been higher.
No, but Nick Clegg still wants to maintain NATO's position of 2% spending on the defence, and William Hague just made the announcement of 160 billion.
It isn't in our. The 2% isn't in our manifesto.
It's not in the manifesto, but he wants to maintain that.
I would prefer
to
maintain.
With it?
I would prefer to maintain.
So why not include that in the manifesto?
Because the view was by the manifesto group they didn't want to put it in the manifesto, and in fact, if you actually look at our manifesto, there is a small amount of defence cut, and it takes it so we can't pledge the 2%.
How would you offer a defence cut when you're actually maintaining the 2% of?
No, we're not maintaining the 2%.
You actually suggesting that is
no,
what
I
your
would
ambition
prefer, because I think with NATO we need to show solidarity.
Which will cost you around 200 billion.
Yes, I would prefer to do that. I don't think we can afford it at the moment. I would like to do that, but it is not in our manifesto. It might be a long-term aspiration, but it is not in our manifesto. In fact, if you actually cost out our manifesto, it shows you that we're not going to meet that.
But you talk about balance. I'll talk about your manifesto about balance in the books and a fairer society. Dr. Saab, I'm going to refer to the recent ICM's poll. I'm sure you've actually come across it as well, where we've noticed that Lib Dems have actually come down from 19% to the popularity matrix of about 14%, whereas Conservatives just gone up by 1%, and then Labour are where they are, and SNP appears to be the most popular amongst the Scottish folks. How do you think, what are the factors which actually driven Lib Dem's popularity down to 14% from 19%?
I think I'm not well resourced to comment on the electoral numerology. Basically, these people are much better endowed than me. But the thing is, I have to pick up those small bits and pieces.
Yeah.
They really directly affect me.
Okay, because those people are the ones actually going for the polls anyway.
Absolutely, absolutely. I would like to put another question. I mean, if I can take that liberty, that my other concern could be that in the last 5 years, I have seen, because of some flexibility at the part of the government, or on the part of serious fraud office, taking a very lenient view. Scores of Pakistani dirty politicians, rogue bureaucrats, and dodgy businessmen in the last 5 years, and they are in excess of 70. I've done some research on them. They bought properties worth tens of millions of pounds in this country. They bought businesses here, and this is just like that classical banking anecdote that if you borrow £100 from the bank, that's your problem. But if you borrow 100 million, that's bank's problem.
Yes.
So if you bring £10,000 or £5,000 from Pakistan to the UK, you are dealt with stringently by serious fraud office and other institutions they come by. But if you bring 50 million pounds and invest in this country, barely on that despicable, if I can very carefully I can choose that word, on the basis of that they will contribute to the national economy of the UK. So let them bring 50 million pounds. So I have seen more than 70 Pakistanis, the politicians, the bureaucrats, the businessmen, dodgy businessmen, they brought that money. And that money was laundered by the institutions, by the barristers over here, who took the high fees, and they told them ways and means how to end. And the leading figures, they are still in the parliament in Pakistan, in all the parties. I don't want to name the party, but almost all the parties in Pakistan, the 5 mainstream parties, their members, bureaucrats, and there is no law. So do you plan something that in addition to serious fraud office, just like other Congos, I mean, they completely underperformed in the last 5 years. And I think about 35 Congos we don't need in this country, which are really running this country. So if that comes to the decision making, and within the House of Commons in the next Parliament, that would be a very healthy change if that comes. So do you have anything in your mind, especially these two gentlemen, because they know a lot about Pakistan. They know the idiosyncratic knowledge about Pakistan. So in future, would you be able to draft some law, some legislation where you can really get hold of those people and ask them forensically where the money came from?
I think the difficult, if I can address this answer as a criminal practitioner, can I defend the bar, barristers generally, because you mentioned barristers. They have a high level of etiquette and moral and ethical duty to ensure that they are representing their clients fair and not in a biased or criminal matter. But can I say that there's no need to change the legislation. The legislation is already there. If you are laundering illegitimate money, the legislation's there. The question is whether or not you can prove it, or whether the evidence you can collect is sufficient in order for there to be a prosecution. And when we talk about politicians from other countries, whether it's Pakistan or India or any other nation that are laundering money to the UK, and there is strong evidence that this money is from illegitimate means, of course there should be prosecutions. Question is whether they can get that evidence. And I can tell you from personal practical experience that when we have had trials where we have required assistance from the Pakistani authorities, they have been reluctant to provide the evidence.
I think we're slightly off the topic. Going back to general election 2015, because obviously we due to time constraints. But apologies if we are cutting you short. I actually want to talk about your position on NHS, because right now
we're the only party that are.
Labour Party seems to be doing a lot of credit taking right now for NHS and saving the NHS, and I think their campaign, a bit like 1989, seems to be saving the NHS. Your stance on NHS.
Yes.
Even with the coalition with David Cameron, was almost similar to what Labour are proposing today, but in a different version.
Except that we're actually offering. We're in our manifesto. We are saying that we will deliver the £8 billion that the chief executive of the NHS says it needs over the next Parliament,
and we've
costed it.
Which I have actually used.
Yes. Labour are only offering about I think 2.4 or 3 billion. 3 billion. So we actually are offering a bigger amount of money to the NHS. We understand that the ageing population that we have in this country is inevitably going to put more pressures on the NHS, and if we don't address that, if we don't accept that, we are going to see the sort of rationing of of treatments that none of us want to see.
So
It's mental health as well.
And mental health.
Yeah,
we're absolutely we're prioritising mental health, which has been a poor relation in the past, and also GP level, we're saying that GPs will have to open in the evenings, so that people who are working people can get accessible for appointments.
So going back to the original point, so 2010 and today 2015,
yes,
the average waiting time is now 6 weeks before you can actually see your GP.
Yes.
And A&E have been cutting, what you've been seeing around the
I
country.
know this because my wife works in A&E. So what we're seeing in A&E is that A&E is swamped by people who can't get doctor's appointments. Now, remember that when Labour were last in power, and I'll probably upset a few doctors by saying this, they threw a lot of money at the NHS, but all they managed to do with it was double doctors' pay.
But can I also say this, Phil? We have recently had support from over 100 odd doctors saying that the policy that we introduced, getting rid of managers, what we were saying, we
so bureaucracy out of NHS.
Absolutely, and that obviously, there's a movement, there's a trade union movement against, that decision. But the reality is, we are putting more doctors and nurses in post. But Phil's made a valid point. Many people which can't get access to GP surgeries end up finding themselves sitting.
So how do you propose that you're going to mend that?
Well, Phil's just said we are looking at 24 hours access at surgeries, but
is that a pledge?
7 days a week.
Is that a pledge?
Till 8 p.m.
Is that a pledge?
There are no pledges in this election.
No, but Labour, on the contrary, they actually have 5 major pledges. One of
pledges. Pledges are all right if you can actually deliver them in a coalition. No, they're not costed. That's one thing. And also, when Labour are making pledges, they're only going to be pledges if they're if they have an overall majority. How can they make a pledge if they have to deliver a coalition agreement? If we end up in coalition with Labour, they might be able to deliver some of those pledges because they're our aspirations as well. We might even be going further than that.
That leads me to the next question, and we only got 1 minute left. Yeah. I do have 2 questions, so very quick answers. Who would you like to collate with?
In my view, I think we have to leave that to the electorate. If the electorate delivers more seats for the Conservatives, I think that would be our first.
Considering you are in the position to.
If Labour have more seats, then I think we should. I'm very happy to go be a coalition partner of either.
No, but what's your party's position? Because you're in the policy.
No, absolutely.
Wait until the election takes place and see who has the mandate to spearhead a government, and we will work in the interest of the country.
We will.
Okay, fair enough. Second question. SNP and Nigel Farage. How do you see these two for Britain overall?
SNP will...
opposite sides of the spectrum, aren't they?
Yes. Well, SNP, I think, are a problem in that they will get a lot of seats in Scotland. They will make forming a sensible government difficult, as you pointed out earlier. The UKIP will only get 1 or 2 or 3 seats at the most, and I don't think will play a part in forming the next government. And I think that
the UKIP could be instrumental in breaking the voters' strength. So how do you see Nigel Farage's policy on Europe? Just one comment on Europe.
Well, obviously, I'm pro-European. I think that it's vital. It's vital for the UK. Free movement, but free movement is part of the single market. It's actually vital for UK to be inside the single market. If you ask UK businesses or international businesses where they want the UK, it's inside that single market, producing goods for 500 million people. They don't want to be on the outside. Manufacturers don't want to go back to the old days of having to get paperwork for machinery to cross the border. We attract, and we are the European champion at attracting inward investment into this country, better than Germany, better than France, but we would lose that. We would lose that if we left the single market.
And can I just finally say this, that obviously all political parties have pledged that they want to reduce the deficit. The Liberal Democrats are the only party that have said that we wouldn't cut as much as the Tories, but equally we wouldn't borrow as much as Labour. Now you can imagine what would happen if you borrow large amounts of money. your interest rates, your mortgages are potentially at risk, because what would happen inherently is if your country is borrowing more money but hasn't got plans to
That's
deliver.
almost scaremongering. I don't
Well,
buy
you
that
say
argument.
that, but people won't forget.
No, but
what
I
happened
don't buy that
well,
argument.
you may not buy it, but people won't forget what happened in the 1980s, 90s, when interest rates touched 16, 17%. And the reality is, if you've got a
That was a
debt,
completely different market and incorrect
let me just say,
analogy being
but the reality is that if you are borrowing more, and the money that you are borrowing, you have no plan of delivering, that borrowing becomes riskier. If it becomes riskier, we all know what happens in terms of interest rates.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. We'll leave it there. I'll thank you, Barrister Ayub Khan, Phil Bunyan, and Shehzad Iqbal, Dr. Ijaz Hussain. Thank you very much, sir, once again for joining us. Viewers, I hope you found today's discussion very enlightening, because you don't have long to decide as to which way you want to see Britain going, be it Labour, be it Liberal Democrats, be it Conservatives, SNP, or whichever party that you feel floats your boat. But one thing, do exercise your voting right, and do think about Great Britain as a country when you're voting. Until next week, please, Khuda Hafiz, Assalamu alaikum, and see you next week. Assalamu alaikum.